All right, traders, welcome to today's recap. This is Christian from Hertz Tribeca Trade Group, and it is Thursday, September 13th. So we had a nice day all around. I wouldn't say all around. Let me take that back because I will go over the underperformers of the day. But pretty nice move by the indices. SPY, I always start with these, but I want to talk a little bit about that. SPY up 50 basis points, so a little bit more than a 0.5%. The Q, and by the way, and making its way up, this was a great test of the top of value and the 20-day moving average. If you've watched these videos before, you know that I love when the value areas line up with the moving averages. So in this sense, we had a real nice test of the top of value, which is this red line, as well as the 20-day moving average, which is the light blue line on my charts. Nasdaq had the strength today, up 1% today. I know we've been talking about the S&P not having a 1% day quite a while, but I don't think that really matters, and I'm going to explain why. Nasdaq was up 1%, up 1.1%. And again, real nice, and I think this could have more ahead of it, just just moving now outside of value and above that 20-day moving average. So I think pretty strong. A lot of different names performing well in there. Small caps were a little bit different. Small caps, seem to kind of not be able to kind of get going right now. And there's a couple reasons why, I think, which kind of leads to what I was going to talk about, which is what is not performing. So I always start the videos off with the bad first, and then I go into the good. I don't know. I just always like to do it that way. But if you look at what the top, and then I'm going to spend some time on the Qs. But if you look to see what the best what the biggest weight is in the small caps ETF, IWM, and I'm just bringing that up, so that's why I'm talking a little bit slower. So if you look at the allocation of this, right, it's actually surprising, I think, and to some people, and I think it's always important to not just categorize these ETFs and think, oh, it must be there's small cap tech in here, or there's small. It's actually a lot of banks and financials. If you add banks, and I don't know if you want a couple REITs in here, but let's say you do, as well as insurance, you've got about over 20% of the ETF that is banks, REITs, and insurance. So I'm not trying to say that that's the reason why it didn't jump out today, but or I'm not trying to blame them. But if you look at what happened with banks, or what's been going on with banks, it's a little bit of a question mark, and I welcome explanations for this, because I don't think it's the move in rates. My theory on the banks, and not so much on the KRE, but I know on the bigger banks. I used to work for a bank for a long time, and the revenues are not the same, right? It's not the heyday of when the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s. Their margins are being compressed. So that's a whole nother video. But that's why I haven't really been in love with the financials. I like to buy the financials when they get a little bit cheap. JP Morgan is one name that I like, but I don't really want to spend too much time here, because other than just noting that they're not performing well. Is it a bad sign for the economy? I don't think so. I just think that they're not making money like they used to. And, I think other smaller financial companies are eating their lunch. They're doing things like, if you hear now about what is going on with mutual funds and with ETFs, a lot of mutual funds. I think Fidelity is one that is now going to no fees whatsoever. So I keep hearing no commissions and no fees. So it's just harder, I think, for these to make money. However, the regional banks have been doing a little bit better, but they got walloped the last 2 days, and and look at the volume. So it looks like there's some decent selling going on within this group. Also, right when I thought the builders might be turning the corner, they did come back from the lows. This is the ITB ETF. It's got about 60% builders in this, a better representation of home builders than XHB, even though the names don't represent that. But this one actually has over 60% home builders in it. But yeah, I mean, I was looking at names like Toll. thinking Toll could actually get going here. Like I said, it's actually not that bad. It maintained the 50-day moving average, but I looked at these this morning, and ITB was down 2.1%. So we'll see. Maybe it's a false breakdown. Next, couple other groups to look at. XLV, look at this thing, 52-week high. So, it's funny about this, and one of the things that I led off talking about was the S&P, and I just think this is a very exciting market to be in right now. Every day we've got that sector separation and different groups of stocks moving. So forget about, don't get, forget about getting caught up in whether or not, oh, we're in a bull market, what's going to be the next thing that brings us down. I'm just focused on things that are moving and the momentum in the market. And it's not the same stocks every day. Now, there's some themes that I've gone over in previous videos. The software names, I think small businesses are on fire right now. They're spending. So I think application infrastructure, enterprise software names, they continue to perform very well. Salesforce has been, I actually took off my Salesforce position into strength today. This has just been a great name whenever it dips to kind of get involved, and just over and over. This has been a group this year. Microsoft hit a 52-week high today too. And then all the small cap names, right? So I was playing now, I talked about Now, which I took this position off today too. I just got what I was looking for. Shop has been another name that's had some momentum to it. Workday, I didn't look at this one today, but wow, another one that moved up 1.5% and gapped up. So, any one of these names right now you could have been in for this week, and I think you would have done pretty well for most part. Maybe 80% chance of any of these names in this group, which I think is pretty high. So the whole group has just been on fire. And again, the ETF, the best ETF I know in this space is IGV, which I've been long now for a while. And continues to make, kind of break out new 52-week high for this one. And then if you look across, so I'll get back to healthcare. I know I'm jumping around, but look at Match today. My goodness, I don't own any of this one, and I'm just scratching my head why I don't own any of this one. Same thing with the pot stocks. I really haven't been involved in these pot stocks. I felt like a couple weeks, like about a week and a half ago, I was late, and this thing just continues to go. So the other one, what was the one that we saw the call buying in? Not CGC, I can't remember it, but some of these actually came down pretty decently today. But you can't be in every position, so we at least try to call the ones out that have the momentum in them. But that group, these software names have just been out of control. So going back to healthcare, like that's been a theme this year too. It's just been kind of straight up and to the right, a little bit of consolidation here. So, you don't have to chase after the same names all the time. I think the FANG stocks were, they've been a little bit difficult, I think, to trade recently. Netflix had a nice day yesterday, actually ended up down on the day, so the reason why I go through and look at healthcare and look at some of these other areas, because I think sometimes they're off people's radar. They forget that there's momentum, and it's amazing that it's the healthcare, that not so much the biotech, right? If you look at these charts, and I actually initiated an IBB position today. I've been kind of waiting for it, but I don't know. I'm like second guessing it a little bit because it just doesn't have the momentum that healthcare does. And again, the small cap healthcare ETF is PSCH, which is up well over 40% this year. This looks like it might be a good place to maybe starting to take a look at this group again, the PSCH. And then the other group I talk a lot about is XHE, which also made a 52-week high. This is equipment names. If you're not familiar with some of these names, a couple of them have been seeing a little bit of call activity. What was the one today? Tandem that saw. By the way, so if you look at this XHE, again, I'm getting ahead of myself today. That's not the right screen. It's MHD. So yeah, Tandem is the #1 weight in this, and this saw some February calls. I'm not sure if they rolled some Septembers out to February. But again, just to kind of look at these groups, and you may not be too familiar with these, but there's been a couple of these names that I've actually been seeing some call buying. But I mean, you go one by one through these names, and they've just been absolutely on fire. And you could see by the whole group breaking out. So that's another group. What else broke out or has been breaking out? Defense stocks. Aerospace and defense stocks hit a 52-week high today as well, right? So again, you go back to what's in the S&P and why I would rather trade sectors and single stocks right now, because when you have what's the weight, about over 10% weight, I think, in the S&P is financials, which is a group that I just really don't want to be in right now. So I think that is why I trade the sectors and the single names, and not so much the indices I use basically to hedge. And I think listening to Tepper today, he was on CNBC, always a great interview, and he was talking about some of his positions and what he does with the indices. Right, he uses S&P futures, he was saying, to hedge. Right, that's how most, I think. Well, I don't want to say most, but that's how I think a lot of savvy investors will do. Whether or not they can outperform the indices is a whole nother thing. But for me, I use the indices as hedges. S&P futures. I hear every once in a while I'll get advertisements sent to my inbox about S&P futures, like trading them for alpha. I mean, that's ridiculous. I get it. They're the most liquid thing out there. Just because it's liquid doesn't mean that that's an alpha generating idea. S&P futures, for the most part, are used as hedges for institutions, not as alpha. So anyway, going just kind of taking a little bit of a step back and going into some more of these, views from the top, just because I go over so many different individual names on a day-to-day basis, because it's really exciting to see all these different names and groups moving. So let me go into some of today's option activity. I mentioned Tandem. You could see Tandem. I don't have this up. I have IAC up. There were some IAC calls that went up today. Keep in mind, most of these went up after the move took place today. There was some Decembers that went up today, but the Decembers went up like midday, already after the move happened. Today, by the way, was one of those days where, coming into the beginning of the day, everything was moving, but it's a great place to take profits. When we start the day, much higher than where we closed the day before. We didn't get a big range, even though the S&P, did. But if you look at SPY, it might be a little bit different, because S&P futures, yeah, I mean, it wasn't a big range, right, from lows to high today, and for most names today, most of the move happened right on the open. So it was a day, I think, really to take some money off the table. Not to really initiate new positions. That being said, let me go through a couple positions that we saw today. That we saw some option activity. The first hour of the day was a lot of going after some of those unloved names, right? A lot of emerging markets, a lot of rolling of FXI options. There was a couple other names that they went after too. Yandex is a emerging market name, but a lot of activity in the first hour chasing. Right, these are all guys who are chasing at this point. So we saw that flow. We saw some flow in the casino names too. Right, the casino names seem to have a correlation right now with China. MGM was up. When we saw some calls yesterday, not a huge. I'm not in any of these positions right now. I think they're just a little bit too difficult. Let me talk a little bit about the Chinese internet names. The name that I talked about yesterday, which I think has had the best relative strength, has been Momo. Again, if you go to MTCH and then IAC, which saw calls, but again, after the majority of the move that happened today. But huge move, right? So if these names are on fire, I think Momo will do better than maybe some of the other names. And I think this one looks pretty good. BZUN has been a favorite of mine for a while. This had a nice move today, up 4.7%. And the Chinese internet ETF did see some call buying today, in the beginning of the day and at the end of the day, and it held the gains for the most part, up 3.8%. So again, it will, I think, depend on what China does tonight, or what China does. You know, it's going to need help from the local markets, right? I think if it was just a 1 day bounce, I'm not completely ruling that out, that these names can't come back in. I think it's really going to be the overnight markets have to stabilize. They had a huge move last night, and let's hope we get some follow through from there. A few other names. I'm already through 15 minutes. We talked a lot about some of the movers. J&J's, not J&J did see some calls, weekly calls today. Celgene saw some calls going out to June 2020. MasterCard saw some April 9th, 2019 calls go up. NSC saw a nice call buyer today. I did take this trade. I like the rails right now. They've got some relative strength. So I took that name today. Momo had a nice, this was, so 5,000 of these up printed. Let me just double check here for Momo. Oops. Let's see all activity for the day. There was 10,000. It was labeled as a spread for Momo. All right, so I'll dig into that. Yeah, that's right. I didn't see the other side of it, I don't think. Just check one other thing. 10,000 labeled as a spread. Oh, it was the September. There it was, the 48.50 call spread. That's looks like a 1x2 call spread. So the here it is, right in front of me. 5,000 looked like they were bought, and you could see ratio spread. So they bought 5,000 of the 48s. They sold twice as many of the 10,000. Sorry, it's been a long day. Also, Restoration Hardware saw a nice spread today. And you could see that this went up on an insider purchase today, but the call spread that was purchased earlier, which I don't blame them for doing, because Restoration Hardware is really an expensive option. All right, so that's about it. A couple other names that hit. Caesars has been a name that's been seeing. I already mentioned that one. I think MGM, a little bit of Disney, SGMS, Monster Beverage. UNH was the other one that saw a nice call spread today. AT&T. It seems like they're doing some positioning. You know, this is another beaten up name, but it seems like it's trying to get up back to the 200-day moving average. Let me zoom out so you can see what I mean. But you know, some of these defensive stocks, you know, like I view XLV healthcare as being a little bit defensive, have gotten going. So who's to say that AT&T can't start to move up? Kind of looks like an inverted head and shoulders forming there in AT&T. All right, guys, thanks for watching the video. Have a great night. See you tomorrow.